Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. That's one of my old ducks in the background. Okay, try that again. Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. It is not raining today in Portland, Oregon. I had a really busy morning and, pretty stressed out. And for me, when I feel really maxed out, like emotionally or mentally, I find that doing heavy lifting and kind of mindless grunt labor in the garden is really therapeutic. So today I have decided on the fly, spur of the moment, to work on redoing my annual veggie beds. Now, you can see some of the evidence of that here. When I mean heavy grunt labor, I mean moving large blocks of urbanite. I use urbanite in my garden because when we first moved in, we had a sidewalk buried underground that went all the way from the back of our house all the way through the garden into the neighbor's yard behind us, because that used to be the back half of this property. And I think it was a sidewalk that went to the orchard and perhaps a pump house or something back there. And so we discovered that we had this area where things didn't grow very well, and I dug down and lo and behold, 12 inches down there was a whole sidewalk. So we dug it all up and busted it up, and then I'm left with all of this urbanite. Urbanite is chunks of concrete that you use in place of stone. You repurpose them instead of sending them to the landfill. They're very common in urban spaces. In fact, Portland City uses urbanite in a lot of its structures as well, in parks and even road medians and things like that, sculptures, all kinds of things, bus stops. So these big blocks of urbanite here, really heavy. I busted them up with a sledgehammer and I used them to create raised beds in my backyard for my annual veggies. What I found over the years is that as I add more and more wood chips, the paths fill up, and every few years I shovel the broken down wood chips from the path into the beds, and then I put down more wood chips. But that means not only are the paths growing, but also the beds themselves are growing. And what I find is that the chunks of urbanite get completely buried, and what was a raised bed now has the bed overflowing into the pathway, and the pathway itself has encroached on the bed. So that means every few years I have to dig up the urbanite blocks and reposition them, which is great because I'm building humus, I'm building topsoil, I'm building fertility. And instead of having absolutely no topsoil and then having clay subsoil and that's all I've got, I've now had this thick layer of lovely loamy black organic rich soil. This is the soil I have to work with, nice and black. This is all basically broken down bits from the garden from previous years, and the addition of broken down wood chips. It is really nice and friable and lovely. But it means I don't have the most effective design labor-wise. It means I have to come in every few years and do maintenance. You can see my husband and I have been putting some piles of wood chips down in the orchard here. We kind of stage them, and then I kind of kick them around, or I let the birds kick them around. And then on the other side of the fence, you can see the annual beds. There has been a lot of mole activity in our garden throughout the year, which is a constant force that heaves up the stones. There's been, a lot of kid traffic. Kids have knocked over raised bed blocks. And so even if I weren't doing the work of digging up these, you can see these were totally buried, and you can see how big and heavy these blocks were. Even if these weren't totally buried, they have all become kind of askew, and I need to do some maintenance here before I even think about planting. And also I want to think about, how did I use the garden last year? What was in my way? What was a little bit of a frustration for me, and how can I do differently? So this was a path that you can see here, too narrow. I would get here and I would just be stepping all over plants, and I didn't like that. So I want to make this bed here a little bit narrower. And I might actually take wood that I got off of the free page on Craigslist and use some wood here, because as it breaks down, it becomes a wonderful sponge and holds in water, kind of a hugel border on my garden bed here. And then I might use these pieces of urbanite to stack up the back layer, because you can see my garden bed has encroached all the way to the top of the barrier. And that means very quickly I'm going to have soil spilling over onto the back side here. So I think that's what I'm probably going to be doing. And I mentioned in a video last year, as our summers have been hotter and drier, and I'm thinking about how I can take care of my annual veggies. And annual veggies are really thirsty. They take a lot of water. One of the things I talked about was maybe I want to switch from raised beds to sunken beds. And I've been thinking about how that would work in my garden. And in the backyard, I think it's not really feasible. I have a downhill slope. I have a design that would require me to either raise everything in my garden up so much that I would have soil literally piled up against the fence at the bottom of my yard in order to create sunken beds, or I would have to remove all of that biomass I've spent 14 years building. That didn't make sense. So I think I'm going to stick with raised beds, but I'm going to take these chunks of urbanite here, you can see more over here, and I am going to redo the beds. I'm going to change the shapes a little bit as I get older. I find I want a little bit wider pathways. I've said that in a number of videos. I think initially I wanted to make the beds as big as possible, and my pathways are a little bit narrow. Sometimes it's hard to get a wheelbarrow through when there's vegetation growing over the sides of the beds into the path. I find that my wheelbarrow breaks things like pumpkin vines or cucumber vines, and so I want to make my paths a little bit wider and my beds a little bit smaller so that my plants that I grow in my beds have more room to cascade without being damaged by my wheelbarrow or my dogs or what have you.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I'm using these pieces of wood that are too long for my little wood stove. I split them and then I realized they're just too long and I didn't want to take out the chainsaw and cut them in half. And so I'm going to repurpose them. They're not going to go to waste as a border here. Again, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm just looking for functionality, and it will be beautiful when it's grown over with plants, even if it will be organic and, not up to sort of the suburban lawn standard. It meets my permaculture standard of beauty, so pretty happy with that. And you can see here I'm widening the path as I go. So I'll show you when it's all done. Here you can see I am shoveling the broken down wood chips in the path onto the bed, and then I will add fresh wood chips to replenish the path. I'm losing the light a little bit here, but you can see the finished path. It is much wider and more accessible and freshly mulched. And the bed is also deeper and able to hold more of that rich soil that I continue to build. Really happy with how this afternoon project turned out.
So that's what I'm up to today. It's really, really good to just lift with my legs and not my back, and not think too much about what I'm doing, listening to a little bit of Rachmaninoff, and moving heavy objects is really therapeutic. There's so much of garden work and permaculture work that is labor in one sense, but also therapy in another. And there's so much permaculture and garden work that is not actually about growing food that can still be really, really fulfilling. For me, right now, this is what I need to be doing. This is really helpful. It's helping recenter me. It's helping me process what I've had to go through today. And I'm also accomplishing something in my garden. When we think about the permaculture principle of obtaining yield, that yield doesn't always have to be food or medicine or fiber. That yield can kind of be in intangible forms that are almost hard to articulate, in the way they improve our quality of life, in the way that they help us work out things that we need to work out. The garden is a great place to work out your feelings. So I encourage you, if you don't have a lot to do in your garden in February, maybe there are those kind of intangible things you could do. Maybe just walking your garden, even if it's covered in snow or frost. Maybe just going out and seeing what is beginning to pop up. Is it snowdrops? Is it crocus? Is it a day over 55 degrees and the bees are flying? What can you connect with in your garden that is not the active process of growing plants, but helps you connect with nature, connect with the garden ecosystem, and connect with yourself? Maybe it's something really physical, like moving heavy blocks of concrete, but whatever that is, I hope that you can find that yield to obtain from your garden so that you can really stack all those functions. You can really gain the most out of your permaculture garden. I'm gonna get back to moving some heavy stuff here, and I will be back very soon. Please click like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out how you can support the work of this channel down below. Thanks.